Today, we're going to be talking about sirloin steaks. They're one of my favorite everyday steaks because they're not that expensive and they're filled with great flavor. Especially when you use sous vide, you can tenderize them a little bit. It turns them into an even better cut of meat. We're going to dive into everything you need to know about how to sous vide a sirloin steak coming up next on Amazing Food Made Easy. Hey there, I'm Jason Loxton from Amazing Food Made Easy and president of the International Sous Vide Association. Today, I'm excited to dive into all things sirloin steak. There's sirloin steaks and there's sirloin roast, but both of them can be handled pretty similarly. The roast takes a little bit longer to heat through, but besides that, they can be sous vided and cooked basically in the same manner, which is very convenient. One of the important things to remember about sirloin, the name, is that it's actually a subprimal of the cow. So there's a lot of different cuts that come from the sirloin. You can buy sirloin that's just labeled like that at the grocery store, and that's normally just going to be bottom sirloin. There's also top sirloin, which is a little bit more tender, a little bit beefier, and it's normally labeled top sirloin because it's a little bit better cut than the bottom sirloin is. The top sirloin is what you're going to get if you order a sirloin in a nice restaurant, and it's also the Brazilian picanha, which is very popular, especially with sous viders who are exploring new cuts of meat. There's also the sirloin tip roast, and that's a lot more tough than the other two, but it's something that with sous vide you can tenderize it. I think it actually comes from the bottom round, not the sirloin primal, but it's still called sirloin to just confuse things. And of course, around the world, sirloin is used to refer to different cuts of meat. It can be the short loin. It can also be the rump, depending on what country you're in. So it's good to actually have a feel for what sirloin is called in your country. In this video, we're going to be mainly talking about the top sirloin or the bottom sirloin, because they can be handled pretty similarly. The bottom sirloin, you just want to cook a little bit longer to tenderize it slightly more. And people always ask, why should you sous vide sirloin? And to me, that's one of the biggest answers, is that you can tenderize it very, very easily. Sirloin is not filet mignon. It is not a ribeye. It's not even a strip steak when it comes to tenderness. And if you have a really nice prime sirloin, you're probably going to be fine. Wagyu sirloin, going to be nice and tender. But if you start getting bottom sirloins, especially from Select or Choice, which is what a lot of grocery store sirloins is, they can be tough, and you'll be excited to get a nice steak in. You'll cook it up, and it's going to taste tough and be a little chewier than you like in a nice steak. With sous vide, you can cook it a little bit longer, break down those connective tissues, and it's going to be melt in your mouth tender. Transforms that cut from a slightly tough steak to a tender, juicy, perfect steak. And that's why I love to sous vide them. The other big benefit to sous vide is, of course, perfect doneness from edge to edge. There's no bullseye effect. And sirloin can often be a thicker cut, and so therefore sous vide makes it a lot easier to get that perfect doneness. Not to mention a sirloin roast. A lot of times, traditionally, you're going to be cooking that in the oven, and oven cooking isn't the most efficient, and you're going to have a wide band of overdone meat around a nice, perfectly cooked middle. With sous vide, you can do edge to edge. It's going to be perfectly cooked through, no matter how thick that sirloin roast is, which is a huge benefit for me because I love medium rare steak, and I don't like well to well done steak, which is generally what happens whenever I roast a thick roast in the oven. The final thing, which a lot of people don't think about when they are cooking their sirloin steak for a little bit longer, is that you're actually going to pasteurize it. Once you get past 3 or 4 hours, as long as you're above 130, you're going to be pasteurizing your food, which makes it safer to eat. Because sirloin is a slightly tougher cut, a lot of times people try to tenderize it. Meat purveyors, I know Costco does this at the time of the recording at least, and one of the ways they do that is to use blades to cut up the connective tissue. What that also does is take any bacteria on the outside of the meat and puts it on the inside of the meat. So just giving it a sear doesn't make it safe to eat. If you pasteurize it with sous vide, which only takes a little bit longer in your cooking, you're going to make it 100% safe, just like it would be if it wasn't blade tenderized. And with sirloin, cooking it a little bit longer tenderizes it a little bit more, makes it a little more juicy, and a little more melt in your mouth. So it's a benefit all around. Also means if you're pregnant or immunocompromised, you can eat medium rare meat because you can pasteurize it safely, which is great. So what is the best time and temperature for sous vide sirloin steaks and roasts? Well, there is no correct time or temperature. A lot of it comes down to personal preference, but here's some guidelines to keep in mind. When it comes to temperature, this is a steak cut. You don't want to go braise-like temperatures, so you want to keep it below 150. Even if you like well-done steak, 150 is the max that I would recommend. Me, I like medium rare, so I go 131 to 135. If you like a rare steak, you can go down to 125, but remember, if you're down that low, you only want to cook it for a few hours, and you're not going to cook it long enough to really tenderize it anymore. So if you have a good sirloin, nothing wrong with that, but if you have a lower quality one, you're going to miss out on those tenderization benefits. If you like medium, I go for 140. It's kind of my go-to for people that like medium. They seem to really enjoy it because it's still got a lot of juiciness to it. When it comes to deciding how long to cook your sirloin steak for, it really comes down to, are you trying to just heat it through, or are you trying to tenderize it? If you're trying to tenderize it, I recommend anywhere between 4 to 12 hours for most sirloins. The lower the quality, the longer the time can go. And if you have a select bottom sirloin, you might even be able to push that to 18 hours to tenderize it. As I always say, get to know your local butcher and the type of meat that they serve. Because if you buy the same thing time and time again, then you'll start to understand what times work best for you, because everyone's meat is different. Something I get from the grocery store here could be very different than what you get from the grocery store near you on the other side of the country, not to mention a different country. If you're not worried about tenderizing it, then you just have to worry about the thickness of the meat. That will determine how long you need to cook it to heat it through. You can find a bunch of sous vide heating charts. I have some on my website, and also Douglas Baldwin has some good ones. They'll tell you exactly how long you need to cook it based on the thickness. They're just minimum recommendations. You don't need to be exact or pull it out at the exact moment when you hit that time, but they're good rule of thumb guidelines. In general, for a 1-inch steak, you're looking at about an hour and 15 minutes. For a 1.5-inch steak, you're looking at about 2 hours and 20 minutes. And for a 2-inch steak, you're looking at 3 hours and 35 minutes. Those are kind of back of the envelope calculations that will get you into range of what you're looking for. And if you need to, you can always speed up those times by using delta T cooking, which is basically setting the temperature about 2 degrees higher, and it knocks off about 20 to 30% of the cook time. You can check out my article on delta T cooking if you don't know what that is at afmeasy.com/delta T. And in most of those heating charts, you'll also find times for pasteurization if that's what you're going after. So now that we know the right time and temperature to cook the sirloin for, what's the overall process? How do you dive into this? So with all that said, what's my favorite time and temperature for sous vide sirloin steak? I like 131 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 hours. It breaks down the meat enough so it's really tender, really juicy, and 131 is the perfect medium rare for me. But what you end up on is up to your own personal preference, and I'm sure you'll find something that works great for you. So now you know what time and temperature to use for your sirloin steak. What is the actual process for sous videing it? I'll step you through the general process, but to help with this, I'll also link up my favorite simple sous vide sirloin steak master recipe. It's easy to put out a perfectly cooked sirloin steak every time that can then be served with your favorite sauces or rubs to make a great meal. You can use it as the basis for any meal that you would usually serve with sirloin steak, or just turn out perfectly and be one of the best sirloin steaks you've ever had. So first is to prep the sirloin steak. You want to remove it from the store packaging. Some people like to leave it in. I always remove it because I want to season it. I used to just sous vide it in the store packaging, but I ran into a few too many leaks and a few too many issues, so now I always take it out and rebag it myself. Sirloin steak doesn't have too much fat or connective tissue, though some of them can, depending on where the cut is from. So if there's too much, you can remove any big fat deposits or connective tissue that's going through it. If you're serving it whole, you can bag it. If not, then break it down into whatever portions you want to serve it with. Remember, if you're just heating it through, then the smaller the portions are, the quicker they are going to heat. So keep that in mind. An entire sirloin roast is going to take a lot longer than a 1-inch sirloin steak does. That said, don't go overboard. You don't want like a 1/2-inch thick sirloin steaks because they're going to be hard to sear and you're going to overcook them during the searing process. My go-to is usually 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. I think that's a nice, big, juicy steak that you can really enjoy and get a good sear on without overcooking it. When I make my steaks, I either just use salt by itself, or if it's a lower quality one that I want to add some flavor to, I'll use salt and a spice rub. Any of my favorite spice rubs work. Some people hate putting spice rubs in their sous vide, and if that's the case with you, don't use it. I like using it, so I enjoy experimenting with different rubs. I think it's a great way to flavor the outside of the steak. I always save any black pepper till the end, though, because it can impart a weird flavor sometimes during sous vide cooks. I also don't recommend putting in butter or olive oil. I know, right? Should have butter with steak. Put the butter in during the searing process or after the sear. If you put it in during the sous vide process, it just kind of pulls out a little bit of the flavor from the meat, and unless you're using all the juices that come out in the bag, you're going to lose that flavor. So I recommend putting the butter in afterwards. Next, you put the sirloin steak or roast into the plastic bag and you seal it. You can use any food safe, heat safe plastic bag. There's several types of sous vide bags out there. There's Ziploc brand freezer bags or other food safe zip top bags. You can use a water displacement method to seal those. It works perfectly well. You can use edge vacuum sealers like Food Saver or chambered vacuum sealers like VacMaster, Vesta, or Polyscience. If you've portioned it, make sure that you seal them in a single layer. You don't want them stacked, otherwise you're increasing the thickness, which increases the cook time. So put them in one layer, even if you have to use multiple bags, that's completely fine. Finally, you simply seal the bag and get it ready to put into the water bath. The water bath, you just need to set the temperature to whatever your desired doneness is. Like I said, I like 131. A lot of people like 135 or 140 if you're going into the medium range. And if you want it to be on the rare side, then 125 works great. For your water bath, you can use pretty much any container. People use stock pots. I use a polycarbonate container, which is basically means fancy plastic. It holds the temperature really well, and there's a lot of lids and accessories made for sous vide specific applications, which is great. Lapavi and Rubbermaid make two good brands of that, as well as Cambro. And some people even just use a cooler because it holds temperature very, very well. Make sure you set your water between the min and max lines because you don't want it to shut off in the middle of the cook. And then, like I said, set your sous vide machine to the temperature you want for the final temperature to be, and place the sous vide bag into the water bath. The water temperature doesn't have to come up all the way. You don't need to preheat it in most cases, unless you're doing something like fish that is very specific on the timing. And I use sous vide magnets to hold it underwater because you don't want any of the food sticking above the water line, or it's not going to cook evenly and could lead to pretty dangerous circumstances in some cases. Fourth, you're going to let it cook for the desired time. You can find specifics below or in my sous vide heating charts, but we had talked about a few ways you're going to determine that time. Once it's been cooked and fully tenderized to where you want it, you remove it from the hot water bath. And then at this point, you can either chill it in an ice bath and store it in the fridge for a few weeks. Just reheat it later at the same temperature for a few hours before finishing it off on a grill or on a cast iron pan. Or when you're ready to eat, it's time for a quick sear. You remove it from the plastic bag and you want to dry it off really, really well. A lot of people skip this step and they wonder why they can't sear it, because there's water on the outside and you can't get a crust until the water is gone. I like to use paper towels or dishcloths, anything that's going to really take all that moisture away from the outside. You're going to lose it anyway as soon as it goes on a hot pan, so don't worry about it. Then you want to sear it over high heat. It can be on a hot skillet, a cast iron pan, a hot grill, even on a smoker in some cases. You want the sear to be very, very quick, and because it's on high heat, you want to use a high smoke point oil. Some high smoke point ones are like avocado oil, grapeseed oil, extra light olive oil, not extra virgin, ghee. Some vegetable oils work well, and some people like to do a mayo sear, where they put mayo on the outside of their steak. You want to sear it for 2 to 3 minutes total, turning it every 30 to 45 seconds until a golden brown crust forms. Not trying to heat it through. The core temperature is already perfect. We don't want to raise it and overcook it. So every 30 to 45 seconds, turn it. As soon as you get a decent crust, pull it off. And if you want a better sear, you can always let the meat cool a little bit before you start the searing process. I'll usually pull it out of the sous vide machine about 15 minutes before I'm ready to sear it. Now we'll let the outside cool off some, so when I throw it on the hot pan, it gives me a little more wiggle room on my sears. Now it's ready to serve. Your sous vide sirloin steak is perfectly cooked. It's got a nice crusty sear on it and is ready to go. You can serve this in a lot of different ways. I like sirloin steak served pretty thick cut, so I can cut it myself and have nice big juicy bites of steak. You can also thinly cut it, even put it on a hoagie or a sub roll, have a good French dip sandwich. They make good roast beef. There's a lot of different ways you can take your sirloin steak. And now you have all the information you need to make perfectly cooked sous vide sirloin steak every single time. For more on getting started, I always recommend my free Quick Start course at afmeasy.com/quickstart. I also do a lot of work with the International Sous Vide Association, including free video showcases, demos, and cook-alongs at the isva.org. And my Facebook group is Exploring Sous Vide. We have 40,000 sous vide cooks and enthusiasts there at afmeasy.com/Facebook. So I hope you enjoy cooking your sous vide sirloin steaks as much as I do. Until next time, I'm Jason Logston.